My pleasure and honor to be here with Rabbi David Almog, who is a graduate of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, the YCT Rabbinical School, where I had the honor of going to rabbinical school also, and is now a doctoral student at JTS. Thanks for taking the time to talk.
Thank you, Shmuly.
So we're going to explore a little bit about your journeys in Far Eastern religion. Can you share a little bit about some of your experience in seeking various religious paths?
Well, my experience of seeking really started even in high school. This is going back to my father, was never somebody who would immediately accept the dominant ideas that were being taught by anybody, whether it was at my shul or my school, and I imbibed that. So I was always seeking different ideas. And in high school, I was already interested in Jewish meditation, which had an Eastern flair to it, and yoga. But I was also very interested in intellectual movements. My rabbis in high school would identify themselves as rationalists, and they encouraged me to study philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, and others. So I grew up with many different influences and realized that there was a lot of richness, there were a lot of treasures out there in the world that I could seek and find. When I got to college, I went off the derech, and
what does that mean?
What that means is that I stopped being a practicing Orthodox Jew, and I became very interested in other forms of spirituality. And it would be wrong for me to say that I was doing this from a purely intellectual point of view. There were other motivations. For example, my interest in Buddhism, I was already there doing Buddhist meditation. I was already doing meditation, and in college I found a meditation group, but I became very interested in Tibetan Buddhism, mostly because there was a girl I had a crush on. And she was interested in Students for Free Tibet, so I went with her.
Right.
She dated my best friend, I ran the club, an old story. And when I was there, many of the people I met were practicing Tibetan Buddhists, and I was very involved in their interfaith outreach, lobbying for faith groups, and everyone kept calling me Rabbi because I was Jewish, but I don't really keep anything that at the time I identified as Jewish practice. They said, well, what are you? And I felt I needed an answer to that. So I said, well, I'm representing Tibetan Buddhism. So they asked me questions about Tibetan Buddhism, and I didn't have any answers. So I went and I studied with a local teacher of Buddhism who was very charismatic and had a lot of messages I was very interested in. And I began to study Buddhism. And it was a very odd and awkward thing for me because I kept finding ways in which there were similarities with Judaism, differences, and I kept talking about it. And there was a lot of tension involved in that. I felt very ambivalent about it on the one hand. On the other hand, I was much more spiritually active in that mode of my life than I had been for several years at that point. I had found ways of expressing myself spiritually that I didn't know existed. Ultimately, I planned a trip to go to India for 6 months, Israel for 6 months. Just before going there, though, and maybe this is a theme, I met my wife, who is identifiably Jewish, practices Judaism, and I realized that made the tension even greater in some ways. So I went to India. In 4 months into it, just before Passover, I realized, I said, I want to be in Israel for Passover. So I left India. I went to Israel early, and there I decided that I could bring my Buddhist practices and the lessons that I've learned into a Jewish milieu and really begin practicing and being Jewish again.
So just to reverse, how did you spend those 6 months in India? What kinds of spiritual practices were you involved with?
So a lot of it was study. In fact, some of the major similarities between Judaism and Tibetan Buddhism in particular was I spent time at a monastery in South India, in Sara Monastery in Kushtnagar. And
what type of monastery?
It's a Tibetan. It's a Gelugpa monastery. It's the same sect of Tibetan Buddhism that the Dalai Lama is part of. And there, the monks debated, and what that meant was they broke off into pairs, and they would take a text. And while it is very formal, you could hear the sound of people reading texts, reciting texts, and debating them all morning. And it reminded me of my experiences learning in yeshivot, and it reminded me of my experiences in chavruta. And it was amazing just to see those types of similarities in the approaches to text study. So that was part of it. There was a lot of text study. There was regular meditation practices, mantra meditations, visiting holy sites. It was a very rich daily life. It was very intensive. There were also Jewish practices that I kept doing.
Yeah.
For example, I lit Shabbat candles. To me, that was something I could do, and I would recite Tehillim as part of my practice, as one of the devotional practices I would do for preparing for meditation.
And did you engage with the ashrams at all?
Not so much. I was much more involved and invested in Tibetan Buddhism at that. When I was in India, I wanted to go visit an ashram. I planned to go to one, but then I ended up going to Israel instead.
So how did your study and those experiences inform how you think of Far Eastern religion in general, and how did it inform your Judaism? Did it contribute or take away from your Jewish experience in life?
Well, it definitely contributed. I can answer this question in two ways. First, I think most of us define who we are in relationship, and it was much easier for me to define my Judaism and to see it more clearly, what it meant for me in relationship with other practices. But that's a negative contribution.
Right.
There were also positive contributions. I don't believe I understood tefillah until prayer until I had a meditation practice where I regularly invoked very definitive forms of kavanah. I had a meditation practice when I was younger in high school, but it wasn't as I didn't investigate it as much, and it wasn't as rich. So it helped me with my tefillah. Visualization practices in Tibetan Buddhism are key, and many Kabbalistic practices are also visualization oriented, and it helped me understand what those practices were and what they meant. But also specific mitzvot, specific commandments, specific deeds, like how to do tzedakah, how to give charity, to give to somebody in need, while recognizing that their needs and your needs are, that there's no difference in dignity, that their needs are as important to me as my needs are to me, and that their person is equal to my own. There were very specific practices within Buddhism that informed that, and that was true for many mitzvot. Having an ability to look and to perform them with kavanah that I didn't learn when I was in a Jewish setting, or I want to be at least a little more generous also when I say this. I don't mean I wasn't taught it. I may have been taught it, but I was not ready to hear it. It was only once I experienced it through a Buddhist setting that I was able to understand some of the things that I was taught when I was younger.
Yeah. I've been to Thailand a few times actually, and I'm working on different projects in villages, and had a number of learning experiences that enhanced my own Jewish understanding. But let's say a young person in their early 20s comes to you. They say, "Look, I've gone to yeshivot. I've studied Judaism my whole life. It's not lighting my fire. I want to go immerse myself in Buddhism." Would you encourage them? Would you discourage them? How would you respond to them?
So, I was asked this once. There was a parent of a college student who was very worried that their child was very involved in studying Buddhism and studying Eastern religions in general. Whether that term is a fair term. And I turned to them, I said, well, she's still young, and she's really interested in spirituality. This is a really amazing thing that she's investigating it. And I think that there's really a much better chance that she will be she will be a very spiritually minded Jew.
Yeah.
If she feels free to explore,
Right.
then she will. If she feels that she can't do it, if she
Yeah.
feels that she will be excluded or she will be held back. If a student were to come to me, which is a slightly different question, if someone were to come to me and say that they were interested, what I have said in the past is to remember who your family is, that explore. Don't hold yourself back, explore. And I know that that's very controversial because it might involve things that would be considered prohibited in certain Jewish communities. But we don't live in a world where we can hold ourselves back from experiences like this and say because they're dangerous. Because holding back from them is also dangerous. And it also keeps us stagnant and it keeps us intellectually limited.
So we've been kind of talking on a meta level, but maybe you can share one specific Buddhist teaching that you think can enhance our Jewish experience. What is either one Buddhist practice or one Buddhist philosophy or concept that you think, you mentioned tzedakah already, tzedakah, philanthropy, but maybe if you have another example sometime.
Okay. Although there's a very good meditation involved in that one. But one of the practices is in Tibetan they call it lojong, which means mental training, and it is a series of mantras and realizations and reflections on how we interact with other people. And one of them, for example, in Tehillim we learn about how to treat somebody who is our oyev, who is our enemy, and we learn there's a mitzvah if you see your enemy's beast burden that you have to help in that situation, and that is a mitzvah that is specifically geared to helping us overcome those differences, overcome those barriers, and to be part of a community despite our feelings and our emotional differences and some of the things that happened in our past. Within the lojong practice, it's a series of steps where you look at, well, what do I gain from my experiences with this person? How is this person teaching me to be more patient? How is this person teaching me to be more open? How is this person making me confront my anger? How is this person making me confront my hatred even? How is this person making me realize that I'm selfish? And how am I going to act justly even if the person really is doing something that is unjust or that is provoking anger? Those steps help me keep the mitzvah of helping my enemy's beast of burden better. Helps me fulfill the pasuk in Tehillim in a more rich way, and helped inform just the whole conversation about it.
So it sounds like you weren't only exploring this prior to re-engaging in Jewish life and becoming a rabbi, but even today you still find value in some of this.
Oh yes. I mean, the Rambam, Sajagon even has already pointed the way in terms of how do we look at traditions, philosophies, and beliefs that are external to our Mesorah, our received tradition.
Yeah.
How do we look at those, and how do we incorporate them in a way that is authentically Jewish, that does not disrupt our communities, does not disrupt our belief systems, however they are. So I feel very comfortable in turning towards those texts.
Right. It's interesting because in American Judaism, we've often, when we talk about Torah Umada or Torah engagement in society, we oftentimes intellectually are talking about science or Western literature, Western philosophy, and we haven't done as much of our part to be intellectually open to the East. So let me ask you my last question. The concept of avodah zarah, of idolatry. How do you understand idolatry in the 21st century? And how do you understand the notion that there should be some limits of exploration or experience, even if experience is meaningful, that there's some category of forbidden that goes beyond, even for things that may be spiritually meaningful?
Right. So I don't think that there is one definition of idolatry. I think that, and this is perhaps coming out of a Buddhist point of view, although there are Western philosophers who one can point to with very similar notions. I think our labels for things are functional. They're not definitive. So I don't think I would give one definition of idolatry. Instead, I would say that there is perhaps a family of concepts which seem like they're idolatrous to me. One of them is I think the most parochial one, but I still accept, is, to me, Judaism is a family. Our community is a family. People can join it, people leave it, but it is a family. So if it is a practice that takes you away from that family, then it is foreign worship, in a sense. Do I think that that's a terrible, awful thing? We live in a free society, mostly free society, hopefully getting freer. I'm not going to get into politics here. We live in a free society. People can move. People can change. But fundamentally, I want my kids to identify as Jewish.
Right.
So that's one definition. Another definition is something that leads us to dehumanize and delegitimize others. If it is a belief or a practice that makes us blind to our privileges, that limits the way we think about the world and limits us from being able to see the godliness in others. So if it's something that leads us to not see the godliness in an immigrant, in somebody who is disabled, somebody who's struggling, or even somebody who is happy and doing well, if we can't see the dignity in that person and the godliness in that person, then whatever practice or whatever belief that undergirds that, to me, is idolatrous.
Is part of that a panentheistic theology that divinity is infused into everyone and everything, and to deny it from the spot is an idolatry because you're limiting divinity, or are you saying something different there?
It's a good question. There are times in my life where I would have said almost exactly those words.
Right.
That I would have referred to myself as a panentheist.
Okay.
These days, I think it's more. It's not that I'm assuming there is divinity everywhere, but if I close myself off to the experience of the possibility,
okay,
then I might miss it.
Right.
Ezehu chacham halomed mikol adam. The wise person learns from every human being, from every person, and I believe every situation.
Yeah.
There is a Lojong, a mental training teaching exactly similar to that. One of the first lines I learned from my Buddhist Rabbi was that Buddhism is reverse paranoia. It is the belief that everyone is secretly out to help you. And what he meant by that was that you can learn from every circumstance.
Jews could get a little dose of that.
Yes.
A little less paranoia.
A little less.
Okay, continue to check out the wonderful work of Rabbi David Almog. David, thank you so much.